Okay, hello everyone. This is Victor Momo from Excel Moments. And what do we have in this video? In this video, I am going to use Power Automate Desktop to do a find and replace. Somebody's like, that's an overkill. Why Power Automate Desktop for a simple find and replace? I'm going to paint the hypothetical scenario that we'll be working with, which, you know, hypothetical but does happen in real life. At the end of that explanation, you probably see reasons why we need to use Power Automate Desktop. Okay, let me open a folder here and just paint the scenario. So I have only put, three workbooks in here. But think of me as someone who runs a chain of stores in different countries, maybe in about 50 or so countries. Okay. And I have some reports here of maybe items sold, the quantity, the cost, the date. Now, management, well, which does include me, has decided that everywhere we have chocolate, chocolate should be referred to as dark bar. Okay, dark bar. Let's just call it that. I don't know how I came up with that, but that's what it is. So dark bar. Now, if you look through this workbook, you can see you have chocolate all over the place, right? And you also have chocolate in the other workbooks that I showed you in that folder. So now you want to change all of those reports, those tables to have dark bar, instead of chocolate. Okay, maybe now you see that that could be quite a task for find and replace. Okay, because you have to open workbooks, check, replace, and all that. So Power Automate Desktop, can help to automate that process. The beautiful thing is that if you set it up correctly, if you have more, files in that folder, it would also work. If you also decide to just change your criteria and change it from dark bar to something else, you can just execute and it would work quickly. So let me first of all just, maybe put up what I think is the logic to what we want to do. I like to do that before I go into Power Automate Desktop, just to have an idea of the flow. So the first thing is this. I need to get maybe the folder where I have, those files. I'm assuming now for this example that all of them will be in one folder. Okay. So I may be using some keywords, which I know exist on the Power Automate side. So I use my words advisably. So I would say list all files in folder. Okay. And you're like, why using list? Well, I know that's what it should be. So once you list all the files in folder, the next thing is you really need to start opening each of those files, right? To do the find and replace. But it's one of two things. Excel could be running. You want to attach to an instance that is running, or you want to open a new instance. So I could just say launch Excel so that I could do everything on that instance I launch and close it and not interfere with whatever else is going on. So I launch Excel. Now, once I launch Excel, I would open, of course, the file. So I would open, sorry, I need to now kind of loop, through the files, right? Loop through the files. Now, ideally, what should happen here is I should just do the find and replace because, Excel, if you do Control H and, select options, you can do find and replace across the workbook at once. So you don't need to loop, you just do find and replace across the workbook. But what you will see on the Power Automate end is that you can only do find and replace in current or active worksheets. So the implication of this is that you can't just do the find and replace. So when you open the Excel file, you now need to loop, through the sheets. Okay, right? So you loop through the sheets, and then when you loop through the sheets, you then execute the find and replace, on each of them. Okay, so that's kind of the thinking here. Then once you are done with that, you can close Excel. Yeah, something like that. So I think that's kind of let me just indent this a little. Okay, that's kind of how I think it should go. Well, when we get into the Power Automate, then you really see it work. So let's pull up Power Automate. Okay, so I'm going to do new flow. You can see I always have a lot of things I mess with there. Let me call this find and replace across workbooks. I'm not good with naming, but it's important sometimes to have descriptive names so you kind of know what is what. Okay, so we just wait a second while this pops up. Okay, so yes, here it is. All right. So the way I see Power Automate Desktop, it has some, features in some way and it doesn't have it in some way. So you just have to know what exists and how to work, around if you made the limitations or the constraints or the boundaries. Okay. Because find and replace across workbook, would have been nice. Just do it once. But if it doesn't have that feature, then you need to find a workaround. Okay, so the first thing, like I said, is to get a list of the files in the folder. So if you open the folder here, you will see that you have get files in folder. Okay, now let's drop this here. First thing is, okay, where's the folder? I know where my folder is. You may not know, but I do. It's on my desktop. Okay, so on my desktop, you'll see something called like find and replace. Okay, find rep PAD. Yeah, so find rep Power Automate desktop. Okay, so now that's the folder where we want to get the files from. Here, this is your filter in case you have, other file types in there, maybe PDFs, and you only want to restrict it to just the Excel files. Best thing to do at this point would be to do XLS and put an asterisk so that if they are, maybe XLSB, XLSM, XLSX, it would always work either way. Okay. So now if you want to include subfolders, you can do that. If you don't want to include subfolders, just leave it at that. Advanced will just show you, some sorting feature. Oh, how do you want the list returned? Sorted by what parameter and in what order. But for now, that's not important for me. Okay, but that's it. So I'll collapse, advanced because I'm going to look through the files either way. So it doesn't really matter to me whether you start from end to beginning, beginning to end. You're going to look through all the folders and I'm not appending anything. So it's fine. Okay, so once you do this, it's going to create a variable called files. As you can see, they retrieve files as a list of file objects. So files is going to be the result of this, and the files is going to contain the list of the files in that folder. So at every time when you run it, it would always update based on the files in the folder, and it will restrict it to just XLS. Okay, so let's do save. At this point, it may be good to just test and see what comes up. So you can do run. So when you run this now, okay, it's done whatever it wants to do. You can come to the flow variables here, right? And let's see what we have in there. So click and say view, right? So now this is the list it's gotten. So you can see the files, Kenya, Nigeria, Uganda, which is exactly what I have, in this folder. Huh? Okay, so you see that, right? And you can see the index. If you may, indices 0, 1, 2. This is important so that when you're looping, you kind of know how it works. Okay, so now that we have the file, so we have that list, we know we are going to loop through it. Okay, so next thing may be to bring up the loop. Here it's neither here nor there for me. You could decide, oh, do you want to launch Excel before you loop? Do you want to do the launching of Excel within the loop? Okay, well, we'll do it some way. It may not be the most efficient way at this point, but let's get it on. So now, what do we want to do? We want to loop, which is just going through each of the items on that list that we just generated. Now, where are you going to start from? So it depends on you. Just know that that list has an index, start index of 0. Okay, so it means if you have 3 files, it's going to be 0, 1, 2. Okay, if you decide to use a loop that is 1, 2, 3, you must know that you must be doing something like loop whatever you're using to loop minus 1 so that it can correspond with your 0, 1, 2. But I can just decide to start with 0. So I start with 0 so that I know that this is going to pick the first item on that list. Where am I going to end? Normally, if I were starting with 1, I should end at the count. That's like the number of files in that folder, right? Or the number of files in that list, whichever one. So if you expand the files variable, you will see dot count, okay? But now, don't forget, now this is going to be 0 to 3, which is 4 items. But really, we know we have 3 items there, so it's actually 0 to 2, right? 0, 1, 2. So what you need to do is to do files dot count minus 1. This way, you have catered for everybody, okay? And then you increment by 1. This is just saying that don't skip any file. So if you wanted to skip files and say do 1, skip the next, do the next, you can say increment by 2. So increment by 1, it will go file to file, and it will perform whatever actions you want. So whatever you're using to loop here, that variable is called loop index. Okay, you can change these names, but I'll just love to keep them this way for now. Okay, this is like when you do in Excel or in any of those programming languages for I in so and so, for I equals to 2 to 6, blah blah blah. Right, so let's save. Okay, so now within this loop, now this is the loop that goes, from file to file. So whatever we want to do within each of the files, that's within each of those workbooks, needs to happen, inside, here, inside the loop. So let's say here is where I would launch my Excel and, tie to the file that I want it to open. So I would look for launch Excel here, and everything is going to be between the loop and the end. Okay, right? So now when we launch Excel, there are two options. You either launch with a blank document or you attached to a particular document. Don't forget that in this files variable already has all the Excel files, right? It has a list of all of them. So what I think we do at this point is, if we can hook up in some way to, that file, that would be the best thing, right? So instead of doing launch a blank document, let's do launch and open the following document. Now, this is going to be dynamic, right? You can't point to a specific file because tomorrow, things could change. So how do you reference, what it is that you need? Let's pull up the variables we have here. We have the files variable. Don't forget what is contained in the files variable. You already saw it. The files variable contains what? A list of all the files in that folder. So if you do files square bracket 0, that is the first file. Files square bracket 1, second file. Files square bracket 2, third file. But don't forget that you already created a variable called loop index that goes from 0, 1, 2, and so on. So in here, you can just say files and you put the loop index in there. Okay. So when loop index is what? 0, it would open the first file. By the time it goes through the next iteration, loop index is 1, it opens the next file. Okay. So now, any other thing we need to do here, open as read only, you don't want to do that because when you do the find and replace, you want to save, the file. Okay, so if you need to save the file, as in to have the changes, then you don't need to open as read only. The only thing you need to note here is the variable that will be created. It's called Excel instance. So Excel instance here is pointing to, that Excel that would be opened, okay, at whatever it is you want to do. So now, you've launched Excel, so Excel is open. The next thing you're supposed to do now, after we've opened the file, now this is we open the file, because I know that I cannot do find and replace across the workbook. And how do I know? Let me just pull up what we have for find and replace, so that you wouldn't just take my word for it. You see it. So find and replace in Excel, you can see it's in what? In the active worksheet. So you cannot do find and replace across the workbook. If you could do that, that's what I'm just going to do. I'm just going to do one find and replace. It goes across the workbook, but I can't do that. So I have to go from sheet to sheet. So the first thing may be to know how many sheets do I have in the workbook, because it may not be the same across all of them, right? And even if it's the same, you don't know the number. So you need to find a way to get that. So there's a feature or functionality that you have here. Yeah, you're like, Victor, how do you know some of these things? Well, because I've gone through it. I'm not sure I'll just make this video on the fly like that. I'll probably stumble a little. But even having gone through it, it's still a little challenging. Okay, so let's look at the options we have here. Set, there should be one on get a list of get all Excel worksheets. Okay, so get all Excel worksheets. So what I would do is I would get a list of all the Excel worksheets. I would then loop through all of them. So while I'm looping through each one, I would do the find and replace. Okay, so let's do get all Excel worksheets. So we've opened the Excel. Now we need to get a list of all the worksheets in that instance. Okay, so you can see this is tied to that instance, so it's fine. Once it opens that Excel, whatever file it opens, this is it. It's going to get a list of all the Excel worksheets, and it's called sheet names. So sheet names will store the name of what? All the Excel, worksheets in that workbook that you've opened. Okay, so now that I've gotten, that, so it means that in these sheet names, I would see, sorry, in sheet names here, I will be seeing things like, what's it called? Maybe sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, sheet 4. So now we can loop through all the sheets. Okay, some people may want to use, for each here. I could still use my loop. So let's do loop. Hope you follow the logic here, right? So we now have all the worksheets, but we now need to loop through each of them. Like you're going from one to the other, do find and replace, go to the next, do find and replace, go to the next, do find and replace. Okay, so for the worksheets, this one, the index is 1, the starting index is 1. So it means that if you do worksheet 1, that is the first worksheet, as opposed to when you create a list where list of 0, that's bracket 0 is the first item. So index 0, but this uses index 1. So you do 1. Now, where are you going to end? How do you know where to end? Where you're supposed to end really is maybe the number of worksheets. Okay, how do you know that? Don't forget that you just created a variable called what? Sheet names. Sheet names has a list of what? All the sheets. But if you expand, you can see that it has a what? A count. Okay, so it means that if I loop from 1 to the count will just tell me the number of sheets I have there. If it's 5, it will do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to increment by 1. Now this one is called loop index 2. Maybe now it now looks like, oh, okay, do you really like this name? So maybe you could call it, we could decide to call it loop sheets or something. Let's just change this one. so that we know one is loop. This is loop sheet. Okay, so just call it loop sheet. Okay, so now in here, this is where we are now going what from sheet to sheet. Okay, so now what do we want to do when we go from sheet to sheet? We want to do the find and what replace. Okay, so let's be sure we have an option to set as active sheet just to be sure. Let me see. Uh, okay, yes. So think what I'm going to do is this. And the reason I'm doing that is if I look at the find and replace, right? The find and replace is doing it on the active sheet. Where's the find and replace? Sorry, sometimes I do these things. I'm supposed to wear my glasses, but okay, I've seen it. So find and replace in the active worksheet. Okay, so in the active worksheet. So what I'm going to do is I would maybe first of all, set the active worksheet so that as I'm going through each of the sheets, I will make sure that that sheet is active. So once it's active, the find and replace can then work on it. Okay, so I'm going to set active worksheet here, so this is the loop that goes from sheet to sheet. Okay, so this is the Excel instance, then you can say, okay, activate worksheet with, how do you want to go? Do you want to use the name or do you want to use the index? Okay, you know the difference now, right? The name is if you know the name of the sheet, but I could use the index. Okay, and what's my index? Don't forget that I'm doing a loop. Loop sheet goes from what index one to how many sheets I have in there. So I can use this loop sheet as my index. Okay. When the loop starts, it's going to be on one. So that will be sheet one. When it goes round again, it's going to be on two, three, four, five. Yeah, it's quite interesting, but you kind of just have to follow, the logic. So loop sheets. Okay. So loop sheets. So loop sheet should help me, to set each sheet as the active sheet at every point. So what's going to happen here, just so that we understand it, we are going from sheet to sheet. But when I get to sheet one, I will make sure, you can, if you know a little about VBA, you can set a value into a cell without necessarily making the sheet active. What I mean is that on the screen, I could have sheet one and I can write a code to put a value in sheet two. And I don't need to change, the active sheet to sheet one, right? But for this, just trying to tie to the nomenclature I see here, which says find and replace in the active sheet. That's why I'm doing this. I will test a scenario where you don't even maybe activate that sheet and if that's going to work. Okay. So now that that sheet is active, we can then do find and replace. All right. So let's do find and replace now. I even hope it works, but the logic sounds like it's clear in my head and it's fine, but we will see. So now, yes, your Excel instance is your Excel instance. That's not changing. What do you want to do? Do you want to just do a find? You want to do find and replace. So, want to do find and replace. Now, do you want to find just the first match or all matches? I want to find all so that I don't just replace the first instance of chocolate, right? So I do all matches. Now, it says the text to find. It's simple, it's find and replace. So I can say chocolate. All right, let me spell that correctly. Before it says it didn't find anything. Then the next thing, text to replace with, I said I want to do dark bars. Like Victor, how in God's name did you come up with that? I don't know. So now, these are the options you see in your find and replace in Excel. For those of us who are familiar with that, you can do match case. Let me just show you, so to tell you that it's kind of tied to Excel. If you do Control H here, you see the option. You can see you can do match case, you can do match entire cell content. So it's kind of, just mirroring the same thing. Okay. So now dark bars, we are not matching case, so that in case maybe some chocolates we are spelled with a small letter C, that's fine. Match entire cell content. We could decide to do this if we are sure that, we only want to replace portions where, we have only that word in the cell, because I could have chocolate as maybe a title somewhere or whatever, but for now I can leave that. Okay, search by rows, search by columns doesn't really change much for me. The most important thing is you search through everything and you're fine. So the variable produced here is called cells. Okay, so for every of where it finds that chocolate, it's going to put them into that variable called cells. Okay, so let's do save. So let me save this. Let me save this. It kind of feels like it's right. Let's follow the logic, but there may be one thing to do at the end of each of them. Okay, so you launch Excel, so let's start from the beginning. So you start, by getting the list of the files in the folder. Okay, so once you get the list, you then start looping from, the first item in that list to the end. And don't forget these are workbooks. So you open Excel, then within that workbook, you actually want to find and replace within the workbook. But because you cannot do find and replace across the workbook and it's only worksheets, you first get a list of all the worksheets in that workbook. Okay, when you get the list of worksheets, then you now loop from sheet to sheet. Now, find and replace works on the active sheet. So what you do is you make sure that each sheet is active at every point. So when you come into the loop, you make sure the first sheet is active, you then replace. By the time it's coming back the second time into the loop, it's going to the next sheet. It will make the next sheet active. By saying set active, it will replace. Okay. So by the time it does all of this for the first file, which is at this end point here, you could then, well, decide to close Excel, close that instance. This to me at this point is sounding like not the most efficient way. Like, oh, okay, launch, close, launch, close. Is it possible to just launch, and then close at the end of everything? It would take a different shape in the way I'm going to write it, but I would stick with this now and I'll do close Excel at this point. Maybe what in another video. So I'll say Excel instance, yes, but this time I will say save the document, right? So that it saves whatever it updates. So I may do another video and say, okay, well, this is optimized. But this is the logic. If you kind of look at my Excel, it kind of follows, what I thought of initially. So let's see. Yeah, it kind of follows. Okay, so let's open the sample file again just to convince ourselves, first of all, that, right now we have chocolates there. I hope it works. I hope I didn't miss anything. So you can see the chocolates, you go from sheet to sheet, you see chocolates all over the place. So when we are done, we'll open the files and we would see if they've been updated. One other thing you can easily check with is the dates modified. If these dates change, then well, maybe we're in luck. Okay, so let's go to Power Automate Desktop and let's run. Play. Okay, launching Excel, looping, you can see it looping, looping, looping. It's done with the first one, enters again, launches Excel, is looping through the sheets now. Okay, well, you can't be faster than this anyway. So if you have any complaints, argue with your keypad. All right, so it's done according to it, but the acid test is, well, we open the files. So let's see here. Okay, good enough, the times change. So now this have changed, so maybe wish me luck. Let's open maybe Kenya and see. Okay, excellent. So you can see dark bars now. So you see these are dark bars. When you move to the next, let's go to the previous sheet. Dark bars, dark bars, dark bars. Okay, so let me open one other file. I'm excited, right? Yeah, you should be. Like me, you should be excited. Like, wow, it worked. Okay, so Nigeria, let's see. Okay, dark bars, you can see. At least this was the one we opened initially. So dark bars, dark bars. Okay, so it actually does work. So that's a very interesting use case. If I had more files, and you notice it didn't take time, right? So even if I had, say 50 files, boom, as in just click the button and it work. The good thing about the way this has been set up is that if I have more files in that folder, it's still going to work for all of them. Yeah. And that's something you can just test. You add more files to the folder, you run it, it's going to update. Why? Because you've written it in a dynamic way that it always checks how many sheets I have. It's not stuck on three. I didn't hard code the count to say three worksheets or three workbooks rather. It's dynamic. And that's the way you should always try to structure either your codes or your flows so that it's scalable. It can work even when so even if the number of workbooks increase, it will be fine. If the number of worksheets within the workbook increase, it's also going to be fine. Okay, so this is well, an interesting use case. I called it hypothetical at the beginning, but you will find that there are use cases for things like this. Looping through a folder is something we do a lot, but the action you want to perform may differ. But, this gives you a good idea and, a good idea of the flow and so that you can execute this, by yourself. So I hope you've enjoyed this video on Power Automate. I've been told, oh, okay, Victor, that first video was really good. Do more Power Automate videos. I'm like, oh, okay, good feedback. So here you have another one. So if you like this video, please hit the like button. You can also subscribe to the channel. Excel Moments. Yes, please subscribe. Please subscribe. So for now, I'm out.